Welcome to this last Vienna series event of this semester, of course. We will continue next semester. Yes, as most of you know, we had a focus on linguistic issues, so to speak, of Taiwan, of multilingual Taiwan, and we will conclude kind of with a focus on one of the linguistic minorities of Taiwan, if I may say so, yeah, probably, which is the Hakka minority. And we have two speakers today, which is nice. I think it's a premiere. We haven't had any lectures given by two experts. We have invited Professor Vollmann, who is Professor of Linguistics in Graz at the University of Graz, with a focus on social linguistics, and who is the expert, not only in Austria, I think, in global Hakka, as he says, but he was ready also to focus on Taiwan today, but his kind of research goes throughout, maybe you can say something about it afterwards, throughout at least Southeast Asia, and also other parts of the world. I think you also did some research in Vienna even. Yeah. So it's really global Hakka studies that is covered by his research. And he has invited actually another Hakka expert that lives in Vienna, or has been living in Vienna for some years at least. But she holds her university degrees from Australia and Taiwan. She has very interestingly an indigenous language and communication degree from National Impa University. She has actually done her master in Hakka language and literature from National Central University, and she holds a PhD in education from Mandarin University in Australia. And I will not try there's quite a lot of publications on Hakka worldwide. Maybe you can name the one or two that you think represent your research best. I wasn't able to identify because there's quite a lot. But maybe to give an impression where to continue reading if the students would like to have some input also on not only Taiwan, but on the broader scope of what you have done in terms of researching. Okay, so it's yours. Thank you very much.
Okay, so maybe this one with your part. I must say that we didn't arrange very precisely what we are actually doing together. So it's very experimental, but I'm confident that we'll be fine. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Liao Chi, and I am from Taiwan, and I'm from a Hakka family with pure blood. I have checked many times. My parents, my grandparents, two family, they are very much Hakka because they didn't go anywhere. So they meet each other, and then we were in Taiwan speaking good Hakka. Since I was a child, I was not allowed, in my family, I was not allowed to speak Mandarin. So, but I was born in 1980s. So that was already everybody speaking Mandarin, but I spoke Hakka. So that was very strange. And me and my brother were in school, were like monster because we didn't speak very good Mandarin at that time. But my parents want us to do so because they believe that's our mother tongue. So later we learn Mandarin. So this background is a little bit different from other children in Hakka growing up 1980s, because at that time, the language policy is you have to speak Mandarin in school, education, and everywhere. So I spoke Hakka and my brother too, and we were just very rare at that time. And I had a very interesting family name. My name is Liao. In Taiwan, if I go to a Hakka community or I meet other Hakka people and I say I am Liao Zhiyi, they always ask, are you from that Liao? So they say single Liao or double Liao. Single means just Liao. Double Liao means there was a long time ago, there was a story called a Liao family had only one daughter. So she was not able to pass down his family. And when she was about to marry her fiance, the parents found a new way to pass down this Liao family called, when you are alive, you are a person, you are a human being, you are Liao. When you die, you go to Zhang family. So, for example, my name is Liao Zhiyi. When I die, the notice is Zhang Zhiyi. So everybody knows in the heaven or something, after die, I'm Zhang. But when I am still alive, when I'm still breathing, I'm Liao family. So when I meet other people, it's only this family, and I don't know why when I meet other people, they always ask, are you from that Liao family? And I always, sorry, I'm not, I'm just the boring Liao. I'm not from that family. And unfortunately, that Liao family is no longer speaking Hakka. So in Taiwan, that's the current situation. Many Hakka speakers, they don't speak Hakka, they switch to Hokkien. But they knew they were Hakka, but because of the other Taiwanese policy or something else, they have been changing to Hokkien. So they call themselves Hakka Hokkien family. It's called Liao Zhang family. And we also call Shuang Liao, means double Liao, or Sheng Liao, Si Zhang. When you're alive, you are Liao. When you die, you are Zhang family. So I am from the boring Liao. Okay, Taiwan has also other languages, as you probably all know, Australian languages, what we call 原住民, or we call Aboriginal or indigenous. The official record said now they have 16 groups. So there are all these names: Amis, Ataya, Bunun, or Katanavavu, Gavalan, Taiwan, Puyuma, and all of this. Now they say there are 16 groups. And we just checked the official number, says there are 600,000 Aboriginal in Taiwan, but Taiwan has 22 million population. So 600,000 Aboriginal, including all of this. And Amis is the biggest, and the second is Ataya. So they live on the east coast. Ataya is northeast. So that's all the group. And also Han Chinese. Han Chinese is not Aboriginal. Han is just like basic Chinese. And the Han Chinese also include Hoklo. It's the majority, or as you know, it's Hokkien. They are speaking the language from Fujian. And Hakka, that's what we say today, about 50% of the population, 15 to 20. And 外省人 is mainlander. 外省人, this means these people came with KMT party. They came with the army, there were about millions. So they came with them because they are not from Fujian and Guangdong. So we call it outlanders. Outlanders out of Fujian and Guangdong, so it's 外省, other states, because Chiang Kai-shek is not from Fujian and Guangdong, so his army and his followers came with him, not from Fujian and Guangdong. That's why we call them 外省人, and they don't speak Hoklo and Hakka. History of Taiwan, we had many times of the colonized. So with the Dutch, with the Spanish, and also victory of Goxingya, that's the time, 1924 to 1962. This is the biggest history of Taiwan because Goxingya came with his also army and followers. He is originally from Hokkien, from Fujian. So he is a Hokkien speaker, and also his army and his followers are from the neighborhood. He came with a lot of Hokkien speakers and plus Hakkas. So he came with, the history say about 200 20,000 Chinese to come to Taiwan, and probably that's the historical say probably 80% of Hokkien speaker and just a little bit of Hakka, and that's already formed the Chinese population even now in Taiwan. So he came at this time and formed all this population, Chinese population. And of course, at that time, there were still a lot of Aboriginals there. So that's 1924, and then later came with the weak Japan, Qing dynasty. The Chinese also did something, but not so much. And then the Japanese. Japanese came to make everyone speaking Japanese. Japanese had 50 years of Taiwan. That changed a lot. My grandma was born 1927. My grandma was born 1930s. So she went to Japanese school. She learned, even she just passed away 2 years ago. Even at her late time, she speaks very good Japanese. When she met Japanese, somebody came from Japan to Taiwan, spoke to her, she speaks perfect Japanese, like the literature. Because Japanese is already, after many years, they already changed a little bit to more livable. But they comment, my grandma's Japanese sounds like a book. So still many people over 80 years old in Taiwan or over 90, they are able to speak very good Japanese. That's what Japanese language policy did to most of them. And that's the picture of, you see Japanese and some Chinese.
Yeah, that's what you said.
Yes, that's the Japanese. Yeah, so even in the modern Taiwan today, many people who are over age 80 are fluent Japanese speakers. Okay, then come with the KMT. KMT is the Guomindang. Guomindang is the party. It's a political party. That's how we call them. It was at the time, China has split to two parties, and the KMT came with his army, and a lot of people came to Taiwan. And they came here, of course, they wanted to rule Taiwan. So they started to make Mandarin as the only language you can speak. So my parents at that time, the generation, they were only allowed to speak Mandarin. And so the other languages or like Aboriginal languages or other Chinese languages like Hokkien and Hakka were decreasing. So Mandarin was nominated the sole national language in Taiwan. Other languages were forbidden. So that makes other Taiwanese native languages in danger. Okay, that's the same. There was a word for if you are able to read a little bit.
This is after the DPP period. Next period, 1989 onwards.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
1980s. 1980s, it's the KMT settled down Taiwan. Most people start to accept we may not be able to go back to China, so we are Taiwanese. So we are Taiwanese. What really represents us is the language of Hokkien, Hoklo, or Hakka. That's what we came from. My generation came from Qing dynasty. So I just asked my mom to take a photo of this ancestors list. They came to here, we were already the 8th generation. That's how they calculated. So we came at the late Qing dynasty. And then now, until 1980s, we realized we are Taiwanese. So the sense of being Taiwanese start to rise. And there's a, do I have the returning? Okay. So we started to have this movement, like we don't want to be Mandarin speaker, only Mandarin speaker anymore. We want to have the right to speak our language like Hakka, like Hokkien, or even Aboriginal languages. So from 1980s, 1990s, they start to have this movement say, 还我母语运动 means returning my mother tongue. So then they start to give more chance, or in the public, you can speak Hakka or Hokkien or even Aboriginal languages.
Okay, actually cannot find it.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah,
it's
fine.
okay. That's how Hakka clothes and the Japanese clothes. This one is the Hakka clothes and this is the Japanese clothes. Okay, nowadays, that's the new data, 2022, the government met this number to search how many Hakka we have. So far we can see it's about 20.9. I'm sorry, Hakka is, yeah, 19%, 19%, about 20%. So they were about this percentage, but they also made this pretty loose identity. They made the identity with it's 12 identities, how you identify yourself as a Hakka. So we count you one. So if you are blood related, or if you are able to speak Hakka, or if you have any connection to any Hakka speakers, or if you speak Hakka in your workplace or something else, there's a long list, about 12 identities. So they counted so many people now, so it's 4.66 million Taiwanese identify themselves as Hakka, which contribute to 19% of Taiwanese. And the first one is Taiwanese Hakka, and the second one is called Chinese Hakka. Of course, there were also Hakka from China, not only from the Fujian, so they came later. And the third one is Hoklo, it's what we call Hokkienese. It's 74 or 75% of the total population. And the 4.4% is Taiwanese. This column is called Taiwan. Sorry, this is Aboriginal, and this column is called Taiwanese, because there are many, the new generation, they are not able to identify themselves as a Hakka or Hokkien or whatever their parents come from. So there is the new name called Taiwanese. So I am not Hokkien or neither Hokkien, Hoklo, Aboriginal. I don't know exactly, but I want to call myself as Taiwanese. There are still 20% of that. That's the new numbers from government.
People were able to give true answers to that questions.
Yes.
To that question.
Yes. You can identify, maybe you are Hakka, or maybe you want to see yourself as Taiwanese. It's very hard to give the answer. So there's a long list of the questionnaire. You identify yourself. What if my parents, one is Hakka, one is Hokkien? It's very hard to say that. So they also give that one of your father Hakka or something. Yeah. It's very complicated to make this. So, but every 6 years, 5 years, they made this data. So this one is 2016. So it's similar. Taiwanese was, Hakka was 16%. So 5 years later, they became 19%. So it's a little bit change, a little bit increase. Okay. This is how where Hakka live.
Languages. Languages.
Yes. It says over 6 years old, speaking Hakka at home. So most of Hakka live at the west coast, northwest coast, and of course, there was a very strong community, Hakka community in Kaohsiung. If you have heard that, it's called Liu Dui. That was also a very brave army, used to fight Japanese. So they were very proud of themselves, and they had their own style too. And I am from the east part. So my part had a lot of indigenous. So I grew up with many Amis, as we just say, Amis and Ataya. So many of my friends were Aboriginal, and I was not not the majority Chinese speaking Hakka, and because there were also many. And in my research, my master research, I used to write something about Hakka and Amis contact. And in Hakka, we found some code or some borrowing word from Aboriginal. That was pretty interesting. Okay, language shift Hakka to Hoklo, of course, because Hoklo was so much different. The population and the percentage was much bigger. So many Hakka also switched to Hoklo.
Dialect we had already.
Okay, that's okay. This is the 还我母语运动, give back my mother tongue. So that brings all these Taiwanese languages, including Hakka, Hokkien, Aboriginal, back to the stage.
Thai is fine.
Okay, because of all these majority Hokkien speakers, so they call themselves as Taiyu, means Taiwanese. So until recent years, like 1990s, this Hakka Aboriginal realized Taiyu is not Hokkien because Taiyu should be everyone. So Taiwanese languages should be all this language speaking in Taiwan. So they are recently a lot of arguing that we shouldn't use this name anymore. You shouldn't say you are speaking Taiwanese. Taiwanese belongs to everyone. Okay, Hakkaology. So until 1988, so the policy and the education start to reflect all we can do about Hakkaology. So this is Hakka School. This is one of the top universities in Taiwan. And they started to have this department that all the university students or whatever you like to apply to come, then you can study Hakka. What you can study in Hakka about languages, about literature, about even economic, agriculture, or even this is social topics you can study all in Taiwan. And we have not only one university offering Hakka study, I think 2 or 3 they offer Hakka study in Taiwan. So that's Hakkaology. And also government wants to support that too. If you have been to Taiwan in the public, in the MRT, you can always hear people are speaking Hakka like Taipei main station, like Taipei, and then Taipei, Chazam is all in the public, you can hear Hakka. And this is called Hakka means people living here, they are all speaking Hakka. This is a Hakka friendly community. Okay, I can show you a little bit how Hakka sounds like. This is a Hakka book. So they start to teach children speaking Hakka in school. T is called the first lesson, Ngai, means I. Hai Ga Ho, Ngai, He Lim, Vong Den, Yin Nian, Chit Say, Tu, Ik Nian Sen, Do Cha. Does it sound like a little bit like Cantonese? Does it sound more far from Mandarin? Yeah. Taiwan has so far 5 dialects of Hakka, 5 dialects of Hakka. The majority, most of people, 60 to 65% speaking 四线. What I'm saying is 四线. T equal 9. And I'm now showing you the second dialect. T equal 9. Can you hear different? Okay, the first one say I is 9. And then the other one say 9. It's the tones. It's not much different, but they became 2 dialects. Tai ga ho, tai ga ho. That's how it sounds like. Ngai he lim vong den. Ngai he lim vong den. It's only the higher and the lower. That's the most of like 95 people speaking these 2 dialects. But there are still 5% of Hakka languages in Taiwan. They are a little bit different. One of them has been called Hakka Hokkien because they sound more Hokkien now. So it's very, very minority and very few. Okay, that's how it sounds like Hakka. Right. Okay, that's you.
Yeah, okay. So I was thinking, let's first start, how different are the languages actually? if it is only phonology, I wouldn't be too impressed. Okay, so of course the grammar is not fundamentally different from Standard Chinese, but very often there is a different style, different way of saying it. So for instance, there is no bar construction in Hakka. They use sometimes the word qiang in a similar function. But in this example, which I very randomly chose, you can say "atha mai hoiki," at least in Malaysian Hakka. Do you agree? Would you say that? "Atha mai hoiki," sell the car. Or "tana loi mai hoiki," so with a serial verb construction instead of the ba. So the ba is not used in Hakka as an example. If you want to know more about that, there are Hakka grammars, for instance, from the Basel missionaries. There is a grammar and it is online. If you search for Hakka grammar, you should find it. Since you asked about literature, I would say, I assume you are probably a member of Academia Edu or researchgate.net. If you look for Hakka grammar, you will find, for instance, this edition from Paris of the Basel Hakka grammar. And if you're interested in history, since I just remembered Basel, there is an archive in Basel of the Protestant missionaries with a wealth of literature and their textbooks with which they learned the language and so on. That's pretty interesting. For history, I liked very much Thoralf Klein's history book about the Hakkas, in case you're interested in that. Okay, so what is actually the relationship between Standard Chinese and Hakka? Hakka is, of course, a historical dialect, and Standard Chinese is a newly standardized form of language. But beside that, the South Chinese dialects, as they are called, are one of the examples where an imperial language diverges into various different languages. So like Romance from Latin, Spanish, Italian, and so on. So they are relatively closely related, but not mutually intelligible. And of course, China is big and there are many speakers, so there are dialects which wouldn't even understand each other as well. Okay. What else? Now, let me speak about general sociolinguistics for a short while, about minority languages and so on. If you think of a traditional situation of languages, different groups of people speak different languages, and if they do some trading with each other, they have to learn a little bit from the other language to some degree. And very often this leads to the situation that one of those languages becomes the lingua franca, the language everybody learns for doing the business. So this is an unorganized way of getting one bigger language. In modern times, however, nation states actually started promoting a national language, which was a humanist idea, basically, because the national language should serve the communication of all citizens and the participation of all citizens in the state. For that reason, absolutely every state in the world these days wants to have a national language. Yeah? This, of course, will affect the languages which are also spoken in that area and which are from now on either dialect or a minority language. So the idea of a minority language comes about by having a national language, actually. And minority languages are just not as useful to all the speakers because all the media, all the public discourse, the courts, everything is now done in a national language. The nation state, of course, on its part, tries to promote the national language through general education. That's maybe one of the main reasons for general education. So this is the modern situation in general, and that very often leads to language change or language shift, which means the speakers of one language stop speaking that language and speak the bigger one. Of course, there are intermediary steps. First, the dialects or minority languages will converge to some degree with the national language, with the standard language. And then you will end up with weak speakers and finally rememberers and finally non-speakers. Because learning a language requires some amount of effort. And if you don't hear that language very often, or you don't have to speak it very much, you will end up being a weaker speaker. Just like when you go to school and you learn French twice per week, you don't speak much after 2 years. Let us also consider that there are two types of language contact. The traditional contact is between dialects and languages on an equal level. And it is rarely equal. One has a higher prestige than the other for some reason and so on. But now we have a new variation, which is a standard language versus a dialect or minority languages. And this is a register variation. If you think for a moment, we have a German course in our schools, but we don't learn German there because we know German. But what do we really learn? We learn the higher registers of German at school. So we learn basically this vertical variation or the higher variant. And now when a language is standardized, which means there is some academy creating a lexicon and a grammar, then you can refer to that language much more easily than when the language exists only in variation all the time, where every speaker speaks a little bit differently. So now it is learnable, it is more accessible, and also one of the main functions, it will be elaborated for more complex uses. So the difference could be if you just speak at home with your family, you don't need a very complex grammar, and you have a reduced vocabulary. But if you want to give a public speech, then you have to elaborate your language first in order to do so. So any standard language is made for that, and that's what you learn at school. A minority language doesn't have that. And for that reason, it will always feel weaker. So in other words, you cannot study chemistry in dialect or in a minority language. And let's call this orate versus literate register, because one is more like speaking and the other one is more like writing. But actually you can, of course, write in orate style, for instance, a private message, or you can speak in a literate way, for instance, when giving a speech. Actually, historically, the whole linguistic endeavor started with elaboration of language, and then you needed teachers to teach rhetorics. That's the beginning of linguistics with the Romans and Greeks. So it is always about elaboration, and that makes the standard language stronger than the minority languages or dialects. And if a language is a dialect, considered a dialect, that means it is similar enough to the standard language that it can now be roofed over by the standard language, incorporated, so to say, and and it will become an Ausbausprache, which means it can be elaborated. And that's what's happening with German, for instance. In urban Austrian German, there's much more standard German than in the countryside. Okay, so this is Ausbau. If the language is so different that you cannot possibly integrate it into the standard language idea, so let's say Slovene Carinthia, that doesn't work. So now you have a minority language. And it will also be influenced by the standard language, which is roofing over, as Heinz Kloss called it, roofing over all these varieties. So I also want to point out, whenever we hear of people promoting a language, then let's be aware this is an identitarian function of language. You want to show to which group you belong by speaking that language. And so it's a marker of identity, and it's a shaky one, like every marker of identity, of course, because you don't really have proof. Having an identity is actually a collective idea. I belong to a group. And for that to be effective, everybody needs to accept that. That can be in a very negative way, like you belong to that damn group, or it can be positive, I accept that you want to be that group. Okay? But speaking a small language can prove that you belong, let's say, to the group of Hakkas, but it doesn't help you on an individual level, by which I mean in communication. Because, for instance, if you are a Hakka in Vienna, let's say, there are very few people you can talk to if you speak only Hakka. So you will certainly aim to learn German. Yeah? And very rarely will people ever try to learn Hakka. Why? Because there is no communicative basis for that. Now you can actually put this into numbers. You could say all competent speakers divided by all speakers in this linguistic situation times multilingual competent speakers divided by all multilingual speakers in the situation. And then you get numbers. This is totally made up, so don't note down these words. But let's say 22 million or 23 million can speak Guoyu, and 4 million Hakkas, they all can also speak Guoyu. So it's times 1. So, again, it's an old version. You get the number 0.95. Whereas if you speak Hakka, 4 million people, let's say, in a speaker community of 23 million, very low number. And again, all of these people speak also another language. So you get a very low number, 0.107. So this number, invented by Abraham de Zwaan, a sociologist from Netherlands, should give you a rough estimate how valuable communicatively, just practically speaking, a language is. And that will explain whether a language is learned or not. Okay? Because so if you learn English, that is most useful. We can all talk with each other. If you learn Hakka, not so much. So I wanted to mention that so that we understand it's not an enigma why fewer and fewer people speak some language in the world. And actually, we see that with all languages in the world. And for that, Abraham de Zwaan actually explained a system of languages in the world where he calls English the hypercentral language. If you learn this, you are totally well off. Then there are central languages like Arabic, Chinese, Hindi, French, which are Spanish, Portuguese, which are spoken in many countries. And then there are all the national languages, that may be 150 or so. And then you have 6,000 or 7,000 small languages, and they are all now endangered, as the sociolinguists call it. So that's the situation. And when you try to revitalize a language, first of all, this totally relies on the identitarian idea. It's because I belong to this group, I need to learn that group. It's not communicatively useful. And when you try to do it, you must do what usually standardization is doing, which is create a standard, a dictionary, a grammar. And that risks alienating the native speakers because they speak a different dialect variety and so on. It's not easy to do that. And if it's a weak language anyway, first of all, you don't have the same resources as a state to maintain a language. Even if you have, it is not communicatively useful enough for the speakers to actually make the effort to learn that so well. Yeah. So I wanted to mention that because nowadays everybody speaks only about revitalizing languages, but never mentions the problems. Now, I give you a few examples how convergence works, and I did it from other languages. For instance, Austrian speakers says, this is Deutsche, alles Deutsche. You see, so The roofing over language helps emphasize an information. I remember from forensic data, "Alles weiß ich." Exactly like that, the guy spoke. Yeah? Or a Hakka speaker from Malaysia. Do you want to read that maybe, just for the fun of it?
该听好
自学的。
自学的 Oh, that's Mandarin.
Yes.
来期待的按用下拉
Yeah.
但那个 feel 很努力的学习
Yeah. Yeah, again Chinese. You see, there's one Hokkien word in it, yeah, Gaki, and there is some Chinese in it. So it is pretty normal. That's called code switching. Chinese is quite dominant. In this case, there's a good reason, pragmatically speaking. Whenever he speaks about learning Chinese, he speaks Chinese, okay? But it is pretty common for a weak language that it gets heavily influenced in that way. Carinthian Slovene, real data. Oh, Maria, jaz sem bila na tankstelle in sem Faštankava. So again, very different from standard Slovene because they don't participate in the standardization process. Yeah. And it is instead, it is influenced by German because that's what they're speaking most of the time. Or German in Texas. Während der Zweiten Weltkrieg, mein Vater war in der Krieg in New Guinea und der Philippines. And then the second one, meine Kinder tun nicht hier in Friedrichsburg wohnen. So do nicht, yeah, don't. So it's heavily influenced by English. Maybe you noticed there is no case marking, no notion of case marking anymore. Maybe even not gender. Yeah. So, the word order is English. So that's what's happening to a language. A language inevitably changes through contact. And that's another point, if you want to preserve a language, what are you actually preserving? Because nonetheless, the language changes in the direction of the overarching language. Yeah. So now let me come to, I must hurry up, to our research in Taiwan. So we went there, I went there on 3 occasions, my wife a little bit more often, and we went to all these Hakka speaking areas and tried to speak with many people and in Hakka. And we wanted to find the situation in general, but it turned out very much that it was quite difficult to find Hakka speakers. And even if we did, they would often shift back to speaking Guoyu, or they wouldn't even bother. They would say, yes, I speak Hakka, but they would keep speaking Guoyu. So all the data about how many Hakka speakers there are, of course, there are still millions of Hakkas. But do they really speak the language or not? So this is just random images where we try to talk to people in the streets and try to engage them in some conversation. Yeah, okay, let's move over to the analysis of the data, and that's a difficult thing to do. Since there is no standard for Hakka, it is difficult to actually compare it with anything. And of course, the Taiwanese Hakkas, since they lived there for 300 years, have developed their own habits of speaking. And of course, they are coming from a particular dialect group in mainland China, historically speaking. So it is not evident to compare it with anything else. We could only compare it with how would the Malaysian Hakkas say. And very often we got big stylistic differences, which mostly showed a more traditional Hakka in Malaysia and a more Chinese influenced, Mandarin influenced Hakka in Taiwan, in short. I don't want to torture you with too many examples. So this speaker, for instance, from Taipei, reported that she didn't speak Hakka much in the last 30 years. And we asked her to talk Hakka with us, and she said, then, "Ides yang gong suo song ban Hyonggung Suo, you see, she's looking for the word, how to say it actually. And Ida Hyonggung Suo Songban. And I don't want to claim too much because it's really just stylistic and lexical, but Malaysians would strongly prefer a different word, at least. And Songban, of course, that sounds Chinese. So I don't know whether Dr. Liao has different views on that, but it's very difficult to assess such data. Here you see again, when she speaks about work in Australia, she shifts over to code switching to Chinese. She says Tanga instead of Tongo. So even the kinship term, better say it in standard Chinese, and so on. The Malaysian Hakkas would speak more in a traditional Hakka way, if I may say so. So in short, yeah, here we have another example maybe where she tries to say tourist and she says Nginhak, Yoka. So she translates herself into Chinese so that we understand what she means. And when we point out that she uses dose, Leute, Zungwede, that this sounds Chinese, she says, no, we always say dose. And then she says, du gong longse. Well, she uses du. Okay, so let's move on because this, as I said, these examples are somewhat unpleasant to analyze. They often mention the previous discrimination, and here you see something else, code switching. This person said, do you want to read that maybe? Can you?
將來嘅菜飯做咗客家人唔敢講客唔敢講咧。
Yeah, and then the person continues in Guoyu again. Yeah, so you see, very often the speakers don't speak so much Hakka. There's a lot of Chinese in the Hakka. We asked this lady whether her children can speak Hakka. She was maybe 60, and she said, so my children can, because I forced them. And then how did she force them? And again, you see here the use of the two languages in exactly that way that it happened. The child didn't understand. Yeah. But then Guoyu 才跟他讲，所以我下次讲的时候，他就知道你讲嘛该东西。You say what? Yeah. So, but again, you see, all these speakers always shift between Chinese and Hakka. And what was that? I can never read the heading, so I don't know exactly what I'm seeing here. Yeah, okay, I think that's still the same speaker. This is from Hakka TV, a relatively younger speaker, maybe 40, I don't know. And again, you see, he basically speaks Guoyu with inserting a few Hakka words. That is not, it is not true that there are no speakers of Hakka in Hakka TV. Old speakers and in the fisherman's village and so on, they really speak Hakka, but very many educated people are rather weak in Hakka, it seems. And I wanted to compare this also to the Austrian situation. This is a YouTuber who says about himself that he uses dialect. Okay, so he speaks dialect. And he says, hinter der Straßenbrücke von Venzone habe ich mich schon auf links gehalten. Es folgen da nämlich am rechten Ufer dann ein paar so Steinbuhnen. And you can see there are many words which don't exist in dialect, such as Steinbuhnen. So you have no choice but to use standard language. And Straßenbrücke is a mixture. There is code switching inside one word, because it should be Straßenbrücken, no? I would say. And then zahlreiche Kenterungen is again standard. Gesagt is probably a back translation into dialect. And then later he says Brückenfundament, Brücken und Eisenbahnbrücke, you see? So he is shifting back and forth even within one word between dialect and standard. Okay? If you want to see more, just search for Flusswandern mit Steve. You can listen for hours to such type of language, and it's totally normal. But this is what we see with Hakka in Taiwan as well. And I mentioned already the problem that the standardization process, which is absolutely necessary for a language to be promoted, alienates native speakers. So this guy complains on Hakka TV that he's a native Hakka speaker, but he couldn't pass the test. He failed the test. Yeah. I heard this many times in minority areas. For instance, I remember a Breton man, 40 years ago, telling me, "Oh, I don't understand what those young people are talking on TV now in Breton." Yeah, because this urban Breton, that's totally not his language. Yeah, and the same happened in Ladakh when they introduced Central Tibetan as the media language. They don't understand that. Yeah. Okay, now a few more cultural aspects. The Hakkas, it has been mentioned perhaps in the beginning, they were a discriminated group back in China and also in Taiwan. It's mentioned in older literature. And so they settled in less fertile lands and a little bit apart from the Hokkien people. And what the Hakkas often do in history, also the Indian Hakkas, for instance, is they engage in marginal economies which are not done by anybody else. And this makes them a middleman minority. And a middleman minority usually gets wealthy. It's actually a good idea to look. In the case of Calcutta, the Hindus don't like tanning. So the Hakkas became tanners, and then they almost had you could say, a monopoly on that profession. And here in Taiwan, we see them just like in Borneo as middlemen between the indigenous people and the Chinese. So a Hakka merchant was involved in the Mudan incident in 1892. And here, this is Saisiat area in the northwest, where these Saisiat ethnic people who would not know Saisiat anymore, we couldn't find any speaker, but reported that the old people, who we could not interview, they are all able to speak Hakka. So the old people in the Saisiat tribe, they know Hakka. So it was a trade language for them. Just as an example. And then finally, it seems that this promotion of Hakka, it may not help the language because, as I said in the introduction, that doesn't work, and it works nowhere in the world. It doesn't work. There are 3 examples of minority languages which are actually growing, which is Irish cannot die because they enforce the education. They never use it in daily life, but they learn it. Basque, because it has such a strong status, and they hate Spanish culture so much. And thirdly, in Israel, Ivrit, which has been revived for understandable historical reasons. Most speakers were German speakers. But what is happening is now the promotion of Hakkaness all over Taiwan. It is exploited in terms of tourism. So you enter a village and it says Hakka village, and you get Hakka food and everything Hakka. You can read Kajia everywhere. And the people can speak Hakka, but it was rare that we could hear accidentally Hakka speaking. Most often we heard Guoyu, and my wife was walking around and, hey, listen, they're speaking Hakka over there, like this. But it was not that widespread. And Also here, this is College of Hakka Studies, or at least the nearby university. So you see for the Hakka studies, they built a university building in the form of a Hakka roundhouse and so on. So there is a revival of these cultural symbols of Hakkaness everywhere. So Hakka is promoted very much, but as a Taiwanese identity, I don't think that it can save the language long term. My colleague also has mentioned the Hakkas were not Taiwanese Hakkas. For instance, there are around 50,000 Burmese Hakkas in Taiwan, Burmese Chinese in Taiwan, many of whom are Hakkas speakers. And so there is a quarter in Taipei where you can read Burmese script and you see monks in Burmese tradition and so on. And here we found a Hakka speaker who we visited every year for a while, still running his shop at 101 or 102 years old at that time. So he was born in Yongding. He lived much of his life in Burma and then came to Taiwan, where he is now. But these people are not included in this idea of Taiwanese Hakka. And you saw it on the diagram, it's a separate column. So Taiwanese Hakka, because of probably the duration of stay in Taiwan, they do not connect that much to the other idea of Hakka. And so the word Hakka itself, as every label, doesn't mean the same for everybody. So for Taiwanese, it means a type of Taiwanese people. Yeah, and then there are some other Hakkas. In Malaysia, maybe the connection to the mainland is stronger because there's a shorter duration of stay. Most people came like 100 years ago, so a second or third generation of people there. And they still have relatives in China, so they feel connected to that place. And I know of the Viennese Hakkas, we always ask them what it means for them to be Hakka, and we concluded somehow for ourselves, I think they mean mostly their own group by that. And so you may tell me I'm wrong, but there are a label is not objective. So what actually really is a Hakka? So there is the Hakka Consortium at this university. What's the name of the university? Chiao Tong University, Chang Wei-an and Cai Feng-fang, and I don't remember the other names. So they are, so in Taiwan, Hakka research is a big thing, and they collaborate most closely with Kuala Lumpur, University Malaya. So these are the two spots where you have this mostly cultural Hakka studies. And since there is not much about the language itself, so we thought we jump on the language question. And it was a steep learning curve for myself because I didn't speak neither Chinese nor Hakka 12 years ago. So I tried to find out how different actually is it from Chinese, and where do they speak it, and do they speak it? And since in linguistics, I'm constantly confronted with this language revitalization and so on. So that's why I now spoke a little bit against that in the sense that it's pointless to try to revive languages, in my view. That doesn't work. So let's document the language. And of course, it is very interesting to have variation data of everything. But languages die out all the time. And actually, they don't die out, strictly speaking. They are being abandoned by the speakers. And that means you may speak Hakka, but you don't actually do it most of the time. And that means that the next generation may not be very good speakers. And the next generation doesn't remember anything. Okay? So this brings me anyway to the end. I don't feel like I have to repeat this once again. Thank you for your attention. We did it in 60 minutes, 59 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, both of you. I have some questions myself, but I guess, I mean, this was a lot of information, and some of the information was still quite specialized for us.
Sorry for that. You want to sit here?
Linguists.
So that we can answer.
But yeah, or you can sit whatever you prefer. That's fine.
As you like.
So maybe we collect one. We start.
I have a question on the standardization issue. When we look at Chinese dialects, we have at least Cantonese that has a fairly standardized, quite standardized form that's used in Hong Kong, in Macau, Southeast Asia, to some extent still in Guangdong.
Yes.
We have also we have these 7 or 8 dialects, and I don't know, for example, to which extent Shanghaiese or Hokkien on the mainland or Chaozhou, to which extent they have developed standardized form. Now, on mainland China, there's a process of putting dialects away and change everything to one. But traditionally, to which extent are there standard forms for these main dialects? Historically, I mean, in the 20th century, we have Southeast Asia also, where they were promoting schools in Singapore and Malaya. And or have these efforts just been futile?
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah.
I think, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a sinologist actually,
Yeah.
but I read quickly a book about standardization of Chinese. From some sinologists. There was mostly the discussion whether the Nanking dialect or the Beijing dialect should be taken for pronunciation and so on.
Yeah.
In the beginning, there is a kind of standardization in the form of the formation of lingua franca everywhere in the world. So in the South, because they felt much less Chinese in the pan-Chinese sense, they developed their own, what we call today Cantonese, which is a bad name because half of Guangdong is the Hakka and Guangxi is pretty much the same dialect. So it's a misnomer in a way. So Guangzhou language, that obviously developed a local prestige and was used. It took over in Hong Kong, obviously. This was a Hakka speaking area before. No? At that time, new territories are still Hakka villages. And Lao Chun-Fat wrote a paper about that. Just answering to you. How one dialect kills another one is the title of this article. Okay. So I wouldn't call it standardization. I would say when there is a need for global communication, by global I mean bigger than the village, languages tend to converge or everybody learns one of those dialects. And so, of course, the longer it lasts, the more similar will be the Minnan dialects to each other. But there is no official standardization of that. So the standardization really is the problem of the nation state to form a language. And that was settled, let's say, in a period of 100 years. In the end, it was Putonghua and Pinyin and simplified writing. So they had this package. And then they promoted it everywhere. And even abroad, in Malaysia, for instance. And where it came a little bit later, of course. I think in 1981, the school changed to simplified writing and Pinyin in Malaysia. And there is still a problem of where do you get a teacher who suddenly pronounces this in the Beijing way when living in the South or in Sichuan or whatever. So standardization is a difficult process. And they almost chose Nanking pronunciation, for example. but finally didn't. So, and the Cantonese people, they very much have a stronger Cantonese identity, whereas, for instance, the Hakkas tend to always rely on their Chinese identity much more, because they were under pressure from the Punti and maybe from the Hokkien people as well, and maybe the Teochew people also had some self-consciousness. Teochew, for instance, could be a part of Minnan. That isn't for cultural reasons, probably. Anyway, we cannot define a language. A language is defined politically. So you need a political body stating what is fact, and then you have a language. And China is huge. So, of course, unifying this linguistically is quite a big task. But there is no, standardization is difficult and takes a long time, and you need a state for that.
The fact that the language is not written or hardly written at all, how does this play?
If it's
I
not,
mean, it's for all the dialects.
yeah, I would say whenever anybody tries to revive some language, one of the first things they do is make a writing system for it. And you can do this in two ways. For instance, the missionaries, at first they tried to impose a Roman script on Hakka, but the missionaries wanted to use Chinese script. But their bosses didn't allow it for a long time. They wanted to dissociate the Christians from the other Chinese, and later they shifted over. You need to write, otherwise how can you write down your standard? Okay, so
There was.
yeah, you should.
Sorry. I hope I got the order right.
Okay.
I saw.
Okay, well, my question is, since Hakka in Taiwan isn't really standardized, and there are several dialects of Hakka in Taiwan.
Yes.
What does Hakka language education look like? Do they have a standardized variant of those dialects, or did they choose one specific dialect to teach to the people?
Do you want to answer that?
Yes, you can choose. It depends on the area where you live and which school you go to. So from the north, most of people from the north speak the second biggest dialects, like Hanlu is called Hanlu. So the school will offer Hanlu mostly, but if the student want to learn other dialects, they have the right to say that. And the school will try to arrange another teacher to come to teach you. And education is like what we learn for second language, like once a week, and you get a chance to go to another classroom to learn Hakka. And it's just like the book and like what we learn English, like 我是, I'm somebody. And then every semester you have that kind of the semester exam and to see if you pass. And the school will offer you some chance to do some exercise. Yes, you can choose, but most of them, because 95% speak only 2 dialects, so most of students learn these 2.
But that is a problem for small languages with a very short period of standardization. Because, as I said, this alienates the native speakers. They're old speakers. They don't like this. Why do the young people suddenly speak like that? Because you have to standardize. Otherwise, everybody speaks differently.
So, in a sense, all of those dialects are standardized separately. Because if they're, in a sense, all of those dialects have to be standardized separately to be able to be taught, right?
The Taiwanese seem to try to attempt this also for the Austronesian languages. I read online. They have now 46 recognized Austronesian varieties. Yeah, but now you're really killing the whole purpose of this, because if every Taiwanese has his own language, that doesn't help communicatively. But I was talking, for instance, to Taiwan speakers, and the one good speaker cannot help the learner, because first of all, it's a different dialect, and second, it's written in Roman script. You cannot read that. So there are many such problems. And with Chinese script, it's also a problem because you don't know how to pronounce.
So it's called 母语课, it's called mother tongue lessons. So you can choose Hokkien, you can choose Hakka, you can also choose Aboriginal language, as Aboriginal language has many of them. So whatever the student requires, which language they want, then they can always get the teacher that take both of those. Even one student, they will make it.
First of all, thank you for this interesting lecture. I actually have two questions. If you compare all the global Hakka dialects, are there any sounds that are prone to a sound change?
There is generally a lot of change. Of course, sound change. To give an example, the father of my wife speaks middle or Taibu dialect, and she speaks more like Fuzhou people. Just because, you know, when you grow up here in Europe, they speak differently. And of course, none of these people speaks like in China. Because it always changes, even if you don't recognize it. But we didn't focus on phonology very much. Okay.
My second question would it be useful or sensible to reconstruct a Proto-Hakka language?
It does exist.
Okay.
Yes, in Academia Sinica, there appeared a publication. I cannot recall the author now. I think an American author. Neo-Hakka is the term. If you search that on Academia, it was Neo-Hakka. But you can send me an email and I look it up. This is maybe the latest where they reconstruct Hakka. Hakka, you know, that's like a more conservative dialect from 500 to 1,000 years ago from the north. If you think about these different groups, the first were the Teochew and the Minnan people, then what is today called the Cantonese, and the people are called Hakka today, but just the last migrants from the north. And they settled in between in the less fertile area, very mountainous. There was no infrastructure, no roads, beginning of 20th century still. And so they were poor. And for that reason, they migrated a lot. Also, first inside of China, and then also outside. That's why we find 5 million Hakkas outside of China. Yeah.
So if you are looking for some programs learning Hakka, something like that, I think Taiwan government meant a lot. There's one called Mandarin. It's a dictionary because I sometimes use that to remind me how to speak this specific word. Or the Department of Education. It's like a dictionary. If you search some words, they will read for you in different dialects. I use that.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of this work is done in Taiwan. Yeah.
Maybe just a remark about this problem with the writing system and so Chinese characters and the pinyin, because I think that makes a lot of difference. Chinese, how to put down a Chinese, how to standardize a Chinese dialect and a European language, for example, that uses a phonetic system. Because I mean, we saw that some characters are different from they don't exist in Mandarin, like the ngai for war. And there are several characters like that, but then most, I think about 80% are written the same. And so when you learn the different dialects, I think you also use this pinyin system that we see here.
Yeah.
But so this allows there's a certain tolerance for different variations, right? I think with this one, like in one village, you could read it this way, and then I don't know, 20 kilometers away, you read it differently, and it would look different in International Phonetic Alphabet, but it looks the same in this pinyin. So I think it doesn't impede communication, just these variations. If you teach the different kinds of Hakka, they're still mutually understandable.
Yeah.
May I very shortly ask, because I've been wondering, do the kids in school, if they have this do they learn this kind of pinyin?
Yes, because they are already in primary school. So
Okay.
they're able to read something.
Okay.
And I'm sure from the very beginning, it's like we learn Mandarin from the very beginning, they start from.
They do the, okay. Sorry.
Yeah, this kind of pinyin is also a Taiwanese achievement. They really open Hakka for research.
I'm sorry.
Yes, no.
They have a lot of questions. They have a lot of challenges how to design pinyin because Hakka has some different pronunciation from standard Mandarin. So like this Hak, if you only learn Hanyu, you probably are not able to, or you don't understand, you probably pronounce like a Hak. So but the Taiwanese researcher prefer to make it H-A-K. So they have a lot of discussion how to make it similar or more international that other people can read. So they are still have many problems or questions there. How can they make it similar to the perfect pronunciation or to let other people learning Mandarin can also read Hakka? And all these the tones too. So when you learn Mandarin, you know it's ma, with 4 tones, but Hakka has more than 4 tones. We have 6 to 7 tones. So they also need to design different marks for the tones. So this is many changes.
And my comment on that also, orthographies are never phonetic. Actually, if you think of English or French, German is closer to pronunciation to some degree. For instance, this is the way the Tibetans write the word. Okay, so this is original. So S-P-R-E-N, and in academia we use this. The pronunciation in Hassa is J, and the pronunciation in Kam is Pain. But if you know how to write it, you understand the other dialect, because when somebody says Pain, and I've already understood that all these words which are true, speak, and so on, then I get it. So you can learn more quickly, and you understand the language changes, historical changes which happen. But all orthographies are highly idiosyncratic, and basically it's like an image with some help. And also for lettering alphabets. It's not evident how to pronounce them. And another innovation colleague, the Chinese in Malaysia can tell which language the owner of a shop speaks not by reading the Chinese, but by reading the English version of his name. How it is pronounced. Yes. But sure, yeah, the Chinese writing system, I think, is a problem for standardizing.
It also helps at the same time. It's a problem, yeah, at the same time, it's a help.
I wanted to say that in olden times, traditionally, standardization involved mostly the writing system. So every Tibetan, whatever he speaks, will write like this, the same words, okay? And usually the written language is very different from the spoken, even the vocabulary is different. You don't use the same words. So you have to learn an entirely different language, and everybody has agreed on that. And when you speak another language, basically. And modern languages, standardization today, means you create the pinyin, so you know how to pronounce it. Yeah, everybody has to pronounce it the same and so on. And we had this quotation here, but it was too fast, where what was, now I forgot it, now I completely blocked out what I wanted to say. What was it?
The main idea is that if you have a tropical language, then that would be something like a lingua franca.
Yeah.
That is established for communication among
different. Yeah, I still don't get it, but yes, what we experienced is a demonetization of the elaborated language. That means before that only experts could write.
Yes.
And that was the communication at the highest level. And more and more layers of society had to learn the language. So Latin was no longer usable. So you shifted to some German and so on. And then you had to develop this German, and you had to agree on a version of German and on the orthography and so on. And this needed to be closer and closer to spoken language. At the same time, the spoken languages need to converge to the standard, otherwise it doesn't work. So that's why it takes a time to standardize a language. It's not easy. And when small languages want to standardize, that doesn't work within 2 weeks. That's very difficult. And if there are too few speakers, you can barely achieve that.
I just, to this question, if I just mentioned, if you look at the Romansh language in Switzerland, which has 5, they have only 30,000 speakers, but
Yes.
5 standardized forms that are all different. Or
Yeah.
even Ladin in South Tyrol,
Yes.
3 different forms for 50,000 people.
Yeah.
Sami language in
Yeah.
the north, the same thing.
Yes.
They have, and they have been trying for hundreds of years to standardize it, and they are not succeeding.
You know, Vulkan is great
Yeah.
because there's one big divide, Preis and Brech. And so they write both because they couldn't agree on one standard. Yeah, that's difficult. You need power. So if the Preis party could win over just by decree, then it would be easier. But that's also lacking in a small language, a central power which can decide. And Putonghua, it has been decided from above, and it was very successful because actually ultimately it's very useful. And before that, yes, we had this quotation where the Hokklo speakers were happy with the introduction of Mandarin Chinese, thinking it means only the writing, but they can still pronounce it the way they always do, which is Hokklo. And then they were forced to learn a different pronunciation. This they didn't like. So the speaking touches more your identity than writing. That's like when I was young, some students at school would speak dialect. So they wouldn't like to get standard pronunciation imposed on them.
Okay, I think we're almost there. I mean, something that I'm always fascinated with is how can they promote culture, because you have this huge effort to promote, like for example, culture in Taiwan. How can you really promote or establish a culture without the language? This is, can it really work? Can I really have a cultural identity just by eating certain food, but giving it a name that is not pronounced in my own language? So this is something I don't know whether there is research on this, because there is this. I think it's the same on the mainland. They do push certain dialect cultures, but that doesn't mean that they're pushing the languages themselves, or that there is a really successful language policy itself. So, but I'm still fascinated with the idea of separating the language from the culture. Can I feel culturally close to something that I cannot give the proper name? Like I use another language to call something that I identify with, which is an identity marker for me culturally. I still not really get it. And I have one last question that would be the Hakka-friendly communities. I saw this in Taiwan, and I was asking myself, what does it actually mean? Is it just something like a trademark? Is there any benefit for people living in the Hakka? Do you know anything about that?
Yes, if you, for example, you have a lot of people speaking Hakka, or you actually are a Hakka speaking town, means many of them speak, of course, many of them already identify themselves. So if you go somewhere on the street, you can hear people are speaking Hakka. So then you can apply to the government, like we want to be a Hakka town, so you get some. Yeah, then you can make this mark, say this is a Hakka friendly environment. This is more political.
Yeah, and does it have any
Benefit?
benefits?
Yeah, you get some funding.
Okay.
you get some funding to organize some programs, and the people come to this place and tourism.
Okay. Okay, Steve.
I think we didn't mention the political aspect of Taiwanese language policies, which is probably based on showing how different they are from mainland China. By saying we're not really Chinese speaking, we are 80% of people speaking in Hakka and Taiwanese Hakka, not just Hakka, and so on. So what they try to achieve is unity through diversity in a way, which is strange. No? Traditionally, we just have unity. And the question about culture and language, it is not necessarily connected, I would say. We may have traditions which were invented by Celts, and now we are speaking German across Roman and other languages. So I don't. In sociology, you would say there are language-bound cultural goods, for instance, texts, and in this case, you have to translate, or you maintain the language. But maintaining, first, it doesn't work, and second, it is an individual effort for everybody, while translating is one effort. If you can afford the translation, then you have the text. Think of Buddhism. Most Sanskrit texts are now gone, but we have all those texts in Tibetan language. Now the Tibetans are almost gone. We need to translate this to English.
And please take the Pali, other.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, another tradition I was thinking of the Mahayana.
Okay. Any more questions, comments? No, then thank you to the two speakers today. Thanks to all of you for coming. And yes, we will let you know about the program of next semester. We will have another focus, but we will definitely somehow come up with the language issues of Taiwan again, because you cannot do hardly any of the topics without somehow coming close to this. So we will continue. Thank you very much.